Claire Thompson had always been the kind of person who noticed things others missed. While her co-workers breezed through spreadsheets and presentations, Claire lingered on the details, the tiny inconsistencies in numbers, the offhand comments, buried in meeting notes, the subtle shifts in tone during conversations. It wasn't that she didn't trust people. It was just that life had taught her to ask questions before accepting answers at face value. And now, as a rising star at Nexora Tech, one of Silicon Valley's most celebrated companies, Claire's knack for uncovering hidden truths was about to put her at the center of something much bigger than herself. Nexora Tech wasn't just any company, it was an institution. Known for its cutting-edge technology and bold vision, the firm had become synonymous with innovation. From artificial intelligence to renewable energy solutions, Nexora promised to shape the future in ways that seemed almost magical. But beneath its polished exterior lay layers of complexity, bureaucracy, and secrets. Secrets Claire hadn't yet imagined existed when she first joined the team 5 years ago. Her journey began innocently enough. Fresh out of college, Claire had landed what many considered a dream job, working as a junior analyst in Nexora's data analytics division. Her role was straightforward but crucial. She sifted through mountains of information, identifying trends and patterns that could guide the company's strategic decisions. Over time, her hard work paid off. She earned promotions, gained recognition from senior leadership, and built a reputation as someone who could solve problems no one else even knew existed. But nothing prepared her for the day Victor Langley, Nexora's charismatic CEO, personally called her into his office. Victor was the face of the company, a visionary leader whose charm and confidence inspired loyalty among employees and investors alike. With his tailored suits, perfectly coiffed hair, and ability to command attention without saying a word, he exuded power. Yet there was also something disarming about him, a warmth that made people feel seen and valued. When he smiled at you, it felt like you mattered. "Claire," Victor said, gesturing for her to sit across from him at his sleek glass desk, "I've been following your work closely. You're smart, thorough, and unafraid to challenge assumptions. That's exactly the kind of mindset we need right now." He leaned forward slightly, his expression serious but encouraging. "We're launching a major sustainability initiative aimed at revolutionizing green energy. I want you to lead the analysis phase." Claire blinked, momentarily stunned. This wasn't just another project, it was a chance to make history. The initiative, codenamed Evergreen, had already generated buzz in the media, with promises of reducing carbon footprints and transforming how businesses approached environmental responsibility. Leading such a high-profile effort would be a career-defining opportunity. Still, part of her hesitated. Sustainability wasn't her area of expertise, and the scale of the project felt overwhelming. "I'm honored, Victor," she replied cautiously. "But are you sure I'm the best fit? There are others on the team who specialize in renewable energy." Victor chuckled, waving away her concerns. "You underestimate yourself, Claire. This isn't just about technical knowledge, it's about seeing the bigger picture, and nobody does that better than you." His words carried weight, and despite her reservations, Claire couldn't help but feel a spark of excitement. Maybe this was her chance to prove she could handle anything thrown her way. As weeks turned into months, Claire threw herself into Evergreen with characteristic determination. She pored over documents, attended endless meetings, and collaborated with experts from various departments. At first glance, everything seemed impressive. The goals were ambitious but achievable, the partnerships strategically sound, and the projected outcomes inspiring. On paper, Evergreen was everything Nexora claimed it to be, a beacon of hope for a greener future. Yet as Claire delved deeper, small cracks began to appear. Numbers that should have aligned didn't quite match up. Timelines seemed overly optimistic, bordering on unrealistic. Phrases like pending approval and subject to change dotted the contracts, leaving key details vague. When she brought these issues to her colleagues, they shrugged them off. "That's just how big projects work," one senior manager told her. "Don't overthink it." But Claire couldn't stop thinking about it. Something about the whole thing gnawed at her, keeping her awake at night. Was it possible that Evergreen wasn't as perfect as it appeared? Or was she simply overanalyzing, letting paranoia creep in where it didn't belong? One evening, after everyone else had left the office, Claire decided to dig a little deeper. She logged into Nexora's internal database, navigating folders she'd never explored before. What she found stopped her cold. Buried beneath layers of seemingly mundane files were memos outlining plans that contradicted everything Evergreen supposedly stood for. Instead of prioritizing sustainability, the documents revealed a scheme to exploit government subsidies by creating the illusion of eco-friendly projects. Worse still, the proposed developments posed significant risks to local ecosystems, threatening wildlife habitats and water sources. Claire sat back in her chair, heart pounding. This wasn't just a minor oversight or a case of miscommunication. It was deliberate deception on a massive scale. For a moment, she considered ignoring what she discovered, pretending she'd never seen those files. After all, speaking up could cost her everything: her job, her reputation, maybe even her safety. But as she stared at the screen, the weight of responsibility settled over her. If she stayed silent, she'd be complicit in the very corruption she despised. With trembling hands, Claire copied the files onto a secure drive and shut down her computer. As she walked out of the office that night, the city lights casting long shadows on the pavement, she knew her life was about to change, forever. Whatever happened next, she couldn't turn back now. The next morning, Claire woke up with a sense of unease that clung to her like a second skin. She'd barely slept, her mind racing with questions and scenarios as she replayed the documents she'd uncovered over and over again in her head. What was she supposed to do now? The evidence was damning: contracts, emails, memos. But it wasn't enough just to have it. She needed someone who could help her make sense of it all, someone she could trust. And there was only one person who came to mind. Marcus Reed had been Claire's closest friend since college, a sharp-witted investigative journalist who had made a name for himself exposing corporate scandals. While their career paths had diverged after graduation, Claire diving into the corporate world and Marcus chasing stories, they had stayed in touch, meeting occasionally for coffee or long phone calls. Marcus had always teased Claire about working for the machine, but he respected her drive and intelligence. If anyone could help her navigate this mess, it was him. That evening, Claire met Marcus at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town, far from Nexora's headquarters. The place was dimly lit, with soft jazz playing in the background, making it easy to blend into the shadows. As soon as Marcus saw her face, he knew something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, raising an eyebrow as he slid into the booth across from her. "What's going on?" Claire hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one was listening. Then, lowering her voice, she began explaining everything: the inconsistencies she'd noticed, the late-night discovery in the database, the memos outlining the scheme to exploit government subsidies. Marcus listened intently, his expression growing darker with each word. When she finished, Marcus leaned back in his seat, rubbing his temples. "This is huge, Claire. Like Pulitzer Prize level huge. But it's also dangerous. Are you sure about this?" "Because once you step into this fight, there's no turning back." "I know," Claire replied, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "But I can't just ignore it. These projects aren't just fraudulent, they're harmful. People's lives and ecosystems are at stake. If I don't do something, who will?" Marcus nodded slowly, admiration flickering in his eyes. "All right. Let's get to work." Over the next few weeks, Claire and Marcus worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle bit by bit. Claire smuggled more files out of Nexora whenever she could, careful not to raise suspicion. She used encrypted messaging apps to share them with Marcus, who cross-referenced the data with public records, industry reports, and interviews with former employees. The deeper they dug, the clearer the picture became. Nexora's sustainability initiative was nothing more than a smokescreen, designed to rake in profits while greenwashing its image. As the evidence mounted, Claire began noticing subtle changes in how her colleagues treated her. At first, it was small things: awkward silences when she entered a room, hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when she approached. Then came the thinly veiled warnings. One afternoon, a senior manager pulled her aside after a team meeting. "Claire, I've heard some concerns about your focus lately," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You seem distracted. Is everything okay?" She forced a smile, nodding. "I'm fine. Just trying to make sure we dot all the I's and cross all the T's before moving forward." The manager gave her a tight-lipped smile in return. "Good. We wouldn't want any unnecessary delays, would we?" It was a veiled threat, and Claire knew it. But she didn't back down. Instead, she doubled down on her efforts, determined to gather as much proof as possible before taking any action. Still, the pressure was mounting. Victor Langley, once so warm and encouraging, had grown distant. His weekly check-ins with her became shorter, his praise less enthusiastic. When he did speak to her, his eyes lingered on her longer than usual, as if searching for signs of betrayal. One night, as Claire sat alone in her apartment poring over yet another batch of documents, she stumbled upon something that sent chills down her spine. Hidden within a dense legal agreement was a clause detailing the potential environmental impact of one of the proposed developments, a massive solar farm project set to be built near a fragile wetland ecosystem. According to internal assessments buried deep within Nexora's archives, the construction would devastate local wildlife populations and contaminate nearby water sources. Yet the official report submitted to regulators painted a completely different picture, claiming minimal disruption and significant ecological benefits. Claire stared at the screen, her hands trembling. This wasn't just fraud, it was reckless endangerment. If these projects went ahead as planned, entire communities would suffer. Families relying on clean water would face contamination. Rare species teetering on the brink of extinction would vanish forever. The weight of it all pressed down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. She picked up her phone and texted Marcus. "We need to move faster." The next day, Claire decided to test the waters. During a routine update meeting, she casually raised a question about the discrepancies in the environmental impact assessments. "Just trying to clarify a few things," she said, her tone light but deliberate. "I noticed some inconsistencies between the internal reports and what we've submitted to regulators. Should we revisit those numbers before finalizing anything?" The room fell silent. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Victor cleared his throat, his smile strained but still intact. "Ah, yes, excellent point, Claire. Always good to double-check our work. Why don't you take a closer look and let us know if you find anything worth flagging?" His words were calm, almost dismissive, but Claire caught the fleeting glance he exchanged with another executive, a flicker of unease that confirmed her suspicions. They knew, and they were watching her. That night, Claire called Marcus again. "They're on to me," she said, her voice tight with anxiety. "I don't think I have much time left." "Then we go public," Marcus replied without hesitation. "But we need to be smart about it. Make sure we have everything lined up before we pull the trigger. Once this hits the fan, there's no going back." Claire nodded, even though Marcus couldn't see her. "I know. That's why I'm going to keep digging until I have irrefutable proof, but Marcus—" She paused, swallowing hard. "If anything happens to me, promise me you'll publish the story, no matter what." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice firm. "Nothing's going to happen to you, Claire. But yeah, I promise this isn't just your fight anymore. It's ours." Hanging up the phone, Claire felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. She knew the road ahead would be fraught with danger, but she also knew she couldn't turn back. The truth was too important, the stakes too high. Whatever happened next, she was ready, or as ready as she could be. For the first time in days, Claire allowed herself a small smile. She might be outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded by people who wanted her silenced. But she wasn't alone. Not anymore. The day of the boardroom meeting arrived, and Claire felt as though she were walking into a lion's den. The air was thick with anticipation, the kind that made it hard to breathe. She had spent the past week preparing for this moment, reviewing every document, rehearsing her arguments, and steeling herself for the inevitable backlash. Still, no amount of preparation could fully calm the storm brewing inside her. Her heart raced as she entered the sleek, glass-walled conference room where Nexora's top executives gathered. Victor Langley stood at the head of the long table, exuding confidence as he always did. His tailored suit fit him perfectly, his tie a bold shade of blue that seemed to mirror the sky outside. Around him sat the company's elite, CFOs, VPs, legal advisors, all dressed in their finest, sipping coffee from porcelain cups and exchanging polite small talk. A large screen displayed the agenda for the day, finalizing the partnership agreement with a major investor who would fund Evergreen's expansion. It was supposed to be a celebratory occasion, a testament to Nexora's success and innovation. Claire took her seat near the back of the room, clutching the folder containing the damning evidence close to her chest. She scanned the faces around her, searching for any sign of guilt or unease. Most looked indifferent, focused on their phones or whispering amongst themselves. Only Victor glanced her way briefly, his smile warm but tinged with something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or caution. He couldn't know exactly what she planned to do, but he must have sensed that something was off. As the meeting began, Victor launched into his usual charismatic routine, painting a picture of Nexora's bright future. "Today marks a pivotal moment for our company," he said, his voice smooth and commanding. "With this partnership, we'll not only revolutionize green energy, but also set a new standard for corporate responsibility. Together, we'll create a legacy that benefits both people and the planet." The executives clapped politely, some nodding in agreement. Waiters circulated with trays of champagne, offering flutes to toast the occasion. Claire watched silently, her grip tightening on the folder. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. As Victor reached for the pen to sign the agreement, she stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Don't sign it," she said, her voice cutting through the hum of conversation like a knife. All eyes turned to her, surprise etched on every face. For a split second, the room froze. Then Victor's smile faltered, replaced by a flicker of confusion. And then, unmistakably, anger. "These projects are a lie," Claire continued, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. "They're not about sustainability. They're about lining your pockets while destroying communities." She held up the folder, opening it to reveal pages of documents, charts, and photographs. "I've uncovered proof that these initiatives will devastate ecosystems and exploit government subsidies. You've falsified reports, manipulated data, and deceived regulators, and I'm not going to let you get away with it." A stunned silence followed her words. No one moved, no one spoke. Victor stared at her, his expression unreadable, before breaking into a forced laugh. "Claire," he said, his tone light but laced with tension, "I think you've misunderstood some of the complexities here. These are highly technical matters, and it's easy to misinterpret." "No," Claire interrupted, her voice rising slightly. "This isn't a misunderstanding. Look at this." She stepped forward, placing the folder on the table in front of him. "Here's an internal memo detailing how the solar farm project will contaminate local water sources. Here's a contract, showing how shell companies are being used to funnel funds. And here's an email chain discussing how to manipulate environmental impact assessments. Don't insult my intelligence, Victor." Victor's jaw tightened, his composure slipping further. He glanced at the other executives, who shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Some avoided eye contact altogether, while others leaned in to examine the documents. The atmosphere shifted dramatically, the earlier celebratory mood replaced by palpable tension. One of the senior executives, a wiry man named Richard, cleared his throat nervously. "Claire, are you sure about this? These allegations are serious." "I'm sure," she replied firmly. "And if anyone has doubts, feel free to verify them yourselves. But don't pretend you didn't know. This has been happening under your noses for years." Victor finally found his voice, though it lacked its usual charm. "Claire, this is reckless behavior. You're putting the entire company at risk over baseless accusations. Do you understand the consequences of what you're doing?" "The only consequence," Claire shot back, is that the truth comes out. If you cared about the company or the planet, you wouldn't have lied in the first place. For several moments the room remained silent, the weight of Claire's words hanging heavy in the air. Then slowly the dam began to break. One executive muttered something about needing to review the documents more closely. Another pulled out a laptop, scrolling through emails. Whispers spread like wildfire until the once unified front of Nexora's leadership crumbled into chaos. Victor tried to regain control, raising his hands in a placating gesture. "Let's take a step back and address this calmly," he urged, though his voice betrayed his frustration. "There's no need to jump to conclusions." But Claire wasn't finished. "You can spin this however you want, Victor, but the truth is undeniable. If you truly believed in Evergreen's mission, you wouldn't have built it on lies. This isn't just about me. It's about accountability. And it's time someone held you accountable." Her words struck a nerve. Victor's face flushed, red, his polished demeanor cracking under the pressure. For the first time, he looked less like the visionary leader everyone admired, and more like a cornered animal. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, another executive chimed in, a woman named Elena, who rarely voiced her opinions during meetings. "She's right," Elena said quietly, her gaze fixed on Victor. "We've ignored too many warning signs. Maybe it's time we listened." The comment sent ripples through the room. Others began nodding reluctantly, murmuring their agreement. Victor's authority, which had seemed unshakable just moments ago, was unraveling before his eyes. He shot Claire a glare filled with fury and disbelief, but she met his gaze without flinching. She had laid her cards on the table, and now there was no turning back. As the meeting descended further into disarray, Claire slipped out of the room unnoticed. She didn't need to stay to see the fallout. She had done what she came to do. The truth was out, and there was no putting it back in the box. Outside, the sun shone brightly, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Claire took a deep breath, feeling a strange mix of relief and trepidation. The battle was far from over, but for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of hope. Whatever happened next, she knew she had fought for what was right, and that was enough. The fallout from Claire's explosive revelation hit like a tidal wave, sweeping through Nexora Tech and beyond with devastating force. Within hours of the boardroom meeting, news outlets picked up the story, thanks to Marcus Reed's meticulously researched article that went live late that same evening. The piece was titled, "Nexora's Green Lie: How a Tech Giant Faked Sustainability for Profit," and it quickly became the talk of the town. By morning, hashtags like Nexora Exposed and Green Fraud were trending on social media, sparking outrage among environmentalists, investors, and everyday citizens alike. For Claire, the aftermath was a whirlwind of emotions: relief, fear, exhaustion, all colliding in ways she hadn't anticipated. She watched as screenshots of internal memos, falsified reports, and incriminating emails flooded the internet. Commentators dissected every detail, while activists rallied outside Nexora's headquarters, holding signs that read, "Stop Eco-Destruction" and "Truth over Greed." It was surreal to see her private crusade explode into a global movement overnight, but not everyone celebrated her bravery. Back at Nexora, Claire faced a barrage of hostility from colleagues who felt betrayed or embarrassed by her actions. Some accused her of disloyalty, calling her a traitor behind closed doors. Others avoided her altogether, pretending they didn't know her name when she passed them in the hallways. Even those who privately agreed with her were too scared to speak up, fearing retaliation from higher-ups desperate to salvage what remained of the company's reputation. Victor Langley, once the golden boy of Silicon Valley, found himself at the center of the storm. His polished image crumbled under scrutiny as reporters dug deeper into his past dealings, uncovering a pattern of questionable decisions and ethically dubious practices. Investors panicked, pulling out millions in funding almost immediately. Lawsuits began pouring in, from affected communities, disgruntled shareholders, and government agencies demanding answers. Regulatory bodies launched investigations, seizing documents and interviewing employees. In less than a week, Victor resigned, issuing a vague statement about stepping aside to focus on personal matters. but no one bought it. The damage was done. Claire, meanwhile, became both a hero and a target. Environmental groups hailed her as a whistleblower who had risked everything to expose corporate greed. Invitations poured in for interviews, speaking engagements, and panel discussions. Yet alongside the praise came threats, anonymous messages warning her to back off, accusing her of ruining lives and livelihoods. One night, someone slashed the tires of her car, leaving behind a note that simply read, "Mind your own business." Despite the backlash, Claire refused to retreat. She knew the fight wasn't over, not yet. Every day brought new challenges, but also new allies. Marcus stayed by her side, using his platform to amplify her message and protect her identity whenever possible. Together, they worked tirelessly to ensure the truth reached as many people as possible. They collaborated with lawyers specializing in corporate accountability, helping victims file class action lawsuits against Nexora. They connected with grassroots organizations fighting similar battles, sharing resources and strategies to hold other companies accountable. Still, the toll on Claire was undeniable. Sleepless nights became the norm, her mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Friends and family urged her to take a break, to step away from the chaos before it consumed her entirely. At times she wondered if they were right, if maybe she'd pushed herself too far. But then she'd think about the wetlands that would have been destroyed, the families whose water supplies would have been poisoned, and the wildlife that would have vanished forever, and she'd remind herself why she'd started this journey in the first place. One particularly difficult day, Claire received an unexpected visitor at her apartment. It was Elena, the executive who had spoken up during the boardroom meeting. Standing awkwardly in Claire's doorway, Elena looked nothing like the confident woman Claire remembered from the office. Her usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, dark circles underlining her eyes. "I need to talk to you," Elena said quietly, her voice trembling. "Can I come in?" Claire hesitated but nodded, stepping aside to let her in. As they sat down in the living room, Elena fidgeted nervously, clearly struggling to find the words. Finally, she blurted out, "I owe you an apology. For years, I turned a blind eye to what was happening because it was easier. I told myself it wasn't my responsibility, that someone else would deal with it. But you had the courage to stand up when no one else would. And I just wanted to say thank you." Claire blinked, taken aback by the sincerity in Elena's voice. "Thank you for saying that," she replied softly. "It means a lot." Elena nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I've already handed in my resignation. I can't be part of something so corrupt anymore, but I want to help however I can. If there's anything I can do to make things right." Claire smiled faintly, feeling a flicker of hope. "There's plenty we can do. We start by making sure stories like this don't happen again." As weeks turned into months, the impact of Claire's actions continued to ripple outward. Governments tightened regulations around green energy projects, requiring stricter oversight and transparency. Investors grew warier of companies making grand promises without concrete evidence to back them up. Activists gained momentum, organizing protests and campaigns to demand accountability from corporations worldwide. Slowly but surely, change began to take root. For Claire, though, the road to recovery was long and winding. The stress of the ordeal left her physically and emotionally drained. She took a leave of absence from Nexora, unsure if she'd ever return to corporate life. Instead, she focused on rebuilding herself, seeking solace in nature hikes, meditation, and journaling. She reconnected with old friends, leaned on Marcus for support, and allowed herself to grieve everything she'd lost and everything she'd gained. Her turning point came during a weekend retreat organized by a local nonprofit dedicated to environmental justice. Surrounded by passionate individuals working tirelessly to protect the planet, Claire felt a renewed sense of purpose. One evening, as she sat around a campfire listening to stories of resilience and determination, she realized she wasn't alone. There were others like her, people willing to fight for what was right even when the odds seemed insurmountable. By the time she returned home, Claire had made a decision. She couldn't go back to the way things were before, not after everything she'd seen and experienced. But she could use her skills, knowledge, and voice to create real change. She started writing op-eds, sharing her story and insights with audiences eager to learn how to spot deception and demand better from the companies they supported. She mentored young professionals entering the workforce, encouraging them to ask tough questions and prioritize ethics over ambition. And she began laying the groundwork for a new chapter in her life, one focused on advocacy, education, and empowerment. Though the scars of her battle with Nexera would always remain, Claire emerged stronger, wiser, and more determined than ever. She had stared down corruption, risked everything, and lived to tell the tale. More importantly, she had ignited a spark, a movement that showed no signs of fading anytime soon. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream of a future where truth triumphed over lies, and where progress was built not on exploitation but on integrity. Months after the storm had passed, Claire found herself standing on a stage unlike any she'd ever imagined. The room was alive with energy. Hundreds of people packed into an auditorium, their faces illuminated by soft lighting as they leaned forward in anticipation. This wasn't a corporate boardroom or a courtroom. It was a climate summit, one of the largest gatherings of environmental activists, policymakers, and innovators in years. And Claire Thompson, once just another analyst at Nexera Tech, was now its keynote speaker. As she adjusted the microphone and scanned the sea of eager eyes before her, Claire felt a mix of nerves and gratitude wash over her. She thought back to the countless late nights spent poring over documents, the fear that had gripped her when she first uncovered Nexera's deception, and the courage it had taken to stand up against a powerful system designed to silence dissenters like her. It had been a long journey, one filled with challenges, sacrifices, and moments of doubt. But here she was, ready to share what she'd learned with a world hungry for change. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady but warm. "When I started my career, I believed in the promise of progress. I believed that companies existed not just to make profits but to improve lives. But somewhere along the way I realized that promises mean nothing without accountability. Today, I want to talk about why truth matters, and how each of us has the power to demand better." The audience erupted into applause, many rising to their feet in admiration. Claire paused, letting the moment sink in before continuing. She spoke candidly about her time at Nexera, the red flags she'd ignored early on, the isolation she'd felt when she decided to speak out, and the backlash she'd faced from those who wanted to keep the status quo intact. But she also shared stories of hope, the grassroots organizers who had reached out to thank her for inspiring them, the young professionals who now approached her for advice on navigating ethical dilemmas, and the communities whose voices had finally been heard because someone dared to shine a light on injustice. Her words resonated deeply with the crowd. People nodded enthusiastically, some wiping away tears as they listened. When Claire mentioned specific examples of corporations that had changed their practices in response to public pressure, cheers erupted throughout the auditorium. By the end of her speech, the room buzzed with excitement, a collective sense of possibility filling the air. Afterward, as attendees lined up to congratulate her, Claire spotted Marcus sitting near the front row, grinning from ear to ear. He gave her a thumbs up, mouthing the words, "You nailed it." Nearby stood Elena, who had since joined forces with a non-profit advocating for corporate transparency. She waved warmly, holding up a sign that read, "Real progress, real accountability." Seeing familiar faces reminded Claire that she wasn't alone, that together, they were building something bigger than themselves. In the weeks following the summit, Claire received more invitations than she could count. Universities asked her to lecture on ethics in business. Community groups invited her to lead workshops on activism and advocacy. Even government officials sought her input on drafting stricter regulations for green energy projects. Yet amid all the opportunities, Claire remained grounded, focusing on initiatives that aligned with her values. One such opportunity came in the form of an offer she couldn't refuse, leading a newly formed nonprofit called Truth in Terra, dedicated to promoting sustainable business practices while holding corporations accountable for their actions. Funded by donations from individuals inspired by Claire's story, the organization aimed to bridge the gap between grassroots movements and policy changes. Its mission statement was simple yet powerful: to ensure that progress benefits both people and the planet. Claire accepted the role with humility, knowing it wouldn't be easy. Building an organization from scratch required immense effort, patience, and collaboration. But she welcomed the challenge, surrounded by a team of passionate individuals who shared her vision. Together, they launched campaigns to educate consumers about greenwashing, partnered with schools to teach students about ethical decision-making, and worked directly with businesses willing to adopt transparent practices. As Truth in Terra gained traction, so did Claire's influence. Her name became synonymous with integrity and resilience, earning her recognition far beyond Silicon Valley. Awards rolled in, including a prestigious honor for outstanding contribution to environmental justice. Yet Claire never let the accolades go to her head. Instead, she used every platform she was given to amplify others' voices, especially those from marginalized communities disproportionately affected by corporate greed. One particularly memorable day, Claire traveled to a small town nestled near the wetlands that had nearly been destroyed by Nexora's solar farm project. Thanks to her whistleblowing efforts, the development had been halted indefinitely, allowing local ecosystems to recover. As she walked through the area alongside residents who had fought tirelessly to protect their home, Claire felt a profound sense of fulfillment. Children played in streams teeming with fish, birds soared overhead, and trees swayed gently in the breeze. Life thrived here, not because of grand gestures or groundbreaking technology, but because someone had chosen to care. That evening, as Claire sat on a hill overlooking the wetlands, she reflected on how far she'd come. From the quiet analyst, buried in spreadsheets, to the outspoken advocate standing up for justice, her transformation had been anything but predictable. There were days when she questioned whether she'd made the right choice, whether the cost of speaking out outweighed the benefits. But looking around at the vibrant landscape before her, she knew the answer. The fight wasn't over, not entirely. Corporations would continue to test boundaries, seeking loopholes and shortcuts to maximize profits. Governments would sometimes fail to enforce regulations effectively, and individuals would still need to push back against systems stacked against them. But Claire also knew that change was possible, and that every action, no matter how small, contributed to a larger movement. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Claire pulled out her journal. She wrote down thoughts she hoped to share during her next speaking engagement. Real progress isn't built on lies, it's built on truth, and we owe it to ourselves and our planet to demand better. When we hold corporations accountable, we create space for innovation rooted in integrity. When we empower communities, we build futures defined by sustainability. And when we choose courage over comfort, we inspire others to do the same. Closing her journal, Claire smiled softly. For the first time in a long while, she felt truly at peace. The scars of her battle with Nexora would always remain, reminders of the risks she'd taken and the lessons she'd learned. But they were also badges of honor, proof that standing up for what was right could spark meaningful change. As she stood to leave, the cool night air brushing against her skin, Claire glanced one last time at the wetlands. Somewhere deep inside, she felt a whisper of hope, not just for herself, but for generations to come. The road ahead would undoubtedly have its twists and turns, but together, step by step, humanity could forge a path toward a brighter, greener future. And Claire Thompson, whistleblower turned advocate, would walk that path proudly, knowing she had done her part to light the way.